The school that hides secrets. St. Mercy Girls Boarding School stood like a silent fortress in the heart of a remote African town, its grand iron gates separating the world of strict discipline from the temptations of the outside world. With its towering stone walls, polished floors, and teachers who prided themselves on maintaining order, the school was a beacon of excellence, or so the world believed. Adanna stepped through those gates with wide eyes, clutching the only suitcase she owned. Her parents had sacrificed everything to send her here, a prestigious institution known for producing powerful women, doctors, lawyers, and politicians. She had one mission: to study hard, stay focused, and make them proud. But something felt off. The air inside the school was heavy, thick with something unspoken. The students moved through the hallways like normal girls, laughing and whispering, but their eyes held secrets. Her assigned roommate, Zara, a girl with sharp cheekbones and a quiet demeanor, barely acknowledged her. Instead, she sat cross-legged on her bunk, flipping through a well-worn notebook. "Welcome to St. Mercy," Zara muttered without looking up. "Thank you," Adanna said, placing her suitcase on the bed. "It's really beautiful here." Zara let out a dry laugh. "That's what they want you to think." Adanna frowned. "What do you mean?" Zara hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just keep to yourself. Focus on your studies. And whatever you do, don't let them notice you." "Who?" But before Zara could answer, a group of girls strutted into the dormitory, their presence demanding attention. At the front was Amira. Her school uniform fit like it was designed just for her, neat, crisp, and a shade whiter than everyone else's. She walked like she owned the world, and maybe, in St. Mercy, she did. "This must be the new girl," Amira said, her gaze locking onto Adanna. Adanna nodded, feeling an inexplicable tension in the air. Amira smiled, but it wasn't warm. "I hope you settle in well. We look after each other here." Then, just as quickly as they arrived, the group left, their perfume lingering in the air like a silent warning. Zara sighed and turned to Adanna. "I hope you know how to stay invisible." A whisper in the dark. That night, as the dormitory's lights flickered off, Adanna lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. She had expected St. Mercy to be challenging academically, but she hadn't expected this. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Soft, careful. Adanna turned her head just in time to see shadows moving at the far end of the room. The door to the dormitory creaked open ever so slightly, and one by one, 6 figures slipped out into the night. She recognized the last one. Amira. She moved like a phantom, her uniform gone, replaced with something sleek and shining. In the dim light, Adanna saw her sling a small bag over her shoulder before disappearing into the corridor. The door clicked shut. Adanna turned to Zara, whispering, "Where are they going?" Zara didn't answer. She just pulled her blanket over her head and whispered, "Go to sleep. You don't want to know." But Adanna did. And that was her first mistake. The forbidden hallway. The next day, Adanna couldn't shake the image of Amira and the other girls sneaking out. At lunch, she tried asking another student, Chinyu, about it. Chinyu's spoon froze midway to her mouth. She glanced around and then whispered, "Forget about it." "Why?" Adanna pressed. But before Chinyu could answer, a hand clamped onto Adanna's shoulder. She turned to find Amira smiling down at her. Her grip was soft, but her fingers pressed just hard enough for Adanna to understand this was a warning. "Enjoying your first week?" Amira asked sweetly. Adanna forced a smile. "Yes." Amira leaned in slightly. "Good. Then let's keep it that way." With that, she walked away, leaving Adanna's heart pounding. The invitation. Days passed, but Adanna couldn't let it go. Then, one night, as she sat by the window looking at the moonlit courtyard, she heard a whisper. Psst. She turned. It was Yemi, Amira's right-hand girl. Amira wants to see you. Adanna hesitated. Why? Yemi smirked. You'll find out. Zara, who was lying on her bed, suddenly sat up. Don't go, she whispered urgently. But Adanna was already standing. She followed Yemi through the dormitory corridors, her pulse quickening. They stopped in front of an old, forgotten part of the school, the forbidden hallway. No one was supposed to go there. Yemi knocked twice on a door. It creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with whispers, low laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Inside, the real Saint Mercy awaited. The beginning of the end. Adanna stepped inside and saw the unspoken side of Saint Mercy. Girls in silk dresses. Perfume thick in the air. Bottles of expensive drinks. And men who didn't belong anywhere near a school. Amira was seated like a queen, watching Adanna's every move. I knew you'd come, she said with a knowing smile. Adanna's stomach twisted. This wasn't a meeting. It was a test. And whether she liked it or not, she had just stepped into a world she wouldn't be able to leave. The Midnight Club. The door shut behind Adanna with a quiet finality, sealing her inside the forbidden world she had just stepped into. The room smelled of sweet perfume, burnt incense, and something sharper, something that made her stomach tighten with unease. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows against the walls, illuminating figures draped in silk and lace, girls barely older than her, lounging on plush chairs with crystal glasses in their hands. At the center of it all sat Amira. She wasn't in her school uniform anymore. Instead, she wore a dress that shimmered like water under the candlelight. She looked like royalty, her confidence absolute, her eyes gleaming with quiet amusement as she watched Adanna take it all in. You're braver than I thought, Amira said, gesturing for Adanna to come closer. Adanna's throat felt dry, but she took cautious steps forward. I wasn't sure if you'd actually come, Amira continued, sipping from a delicate glass filled with something golden. Most girls take months before they find the courage. Adanna glanced around. The other girls were watching her, some smirking, some whispering. Yemi, standing beside Amira, gave her a knowing look. New girls always hesitate. But once you're here, you never want to leave. Adanna swallowed hard. What is this place? A low chuckle spread through the room. Amira set down her glass and leaned forward. This, my dear, is where the real Saint Mercy girls live. The school you see by day. It's just a prison. But here, she gestured to the room around them, here, we are free. Adanna frowned. Free? A girl across the room laughed. Free to make money. Free to be whoever we want to be. Before Adanna could ask what that meant, the door opened again. A group of men entered. Adanna's breath caught in her throat. These weren't students. They weren't even young. They were older, dressed in fine suits, their eyes sharp with hunger. She suddenly felt small, trapped. She took an instinctive step back, but Amira reached out and caught her wrist. Relax, Amira said, her grip firm but her voice soothing, as if she were calming a frightened animal. This is how the world works, Adanna. You're young, beautiful, and full of promise. These men. They pay for that. Adanna's stomach twisted. She wanted to run. She wanted to turn around, push past Yemi, and bolt through the door. But something held her in place. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was temptation. Amira let go of her wrist, sensing the hesitation. She smiled, slow and knowing. You're not ready yet. That's okay. Yemi stepped closer, brushing past Adanna as she moved toward the men. But when you are, you'll see why we do this. The world only respects money and power, Adanna. This. She gestured to herself, to the silk dress hugging her figure. This is how we take it. One of the men approached, his eyes trailing over the girls like he was picking fruit at a market. He whispered something to Amira, who nodded and gestured toward Yemi. Without hesitation, Yemi took the man's hand and led him through another door. Adanna felt like she was going to be sick. Amira tilted her head, watching her closely. Go back to the dorms if you want. But remember, your scholarship won't last forever. And there are better ways to survive than struggling. Adanna forced her feet to move, turning back toward the door. But as she reached for the handle, Amira's voice stopped her one last time. Sooner or later, you'll understand. Adanna didn't reply. She wrenched the door open and ran. A dangerous secret. Adanna barely made it back to the dormitory before curfew. She climbed into bed, her hands shaking, her mind racing. She could still smell the perfume, the candle smoke, the presence of something she didn't fully understand. She thought of Amira's words. She thought of the men. And she thought of the girls who hadn't hesitated. Zara, who had been pretending to be asleep, opened her eyes and stared at her. You went, didn't you? She whispered. Adanna didn't answer. Zara sighed and turned to face the wall. You'll regret it, she murmured. Everyone does. Adanna stayed awake long after that, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had already made a mistake she couldn't take back. The whisper of temptation. The next day, something was different. Girls who had never spoken to Adanna before were suddenly smiling at her, acknowledging her in the hallways. Simi, another of Amira's girls, slid into the seat next to her during lunch. So, how was your first night? Adanna stiffened. I left. Simi chuckled. You'll be back. Adanna clenched her jaw, determined to prove her wrong. But then, a week later, she received a letter from home. Her mother's handwriting was neat but filled with worry. Adanna, things have been hard. Your father lost his job, and we are struggling with your school fees. Please, my daughter, study hard. Don't let us down. We believe in you. Adanna's heart pounded. The next day, she tried to borrow money from a teacher. The teacher refused. She asked a friend to help her buy books. The friend apologized, she had no money either. That evening, as she sat in the dormitory, staring at the letter, Amira appeared in the doorway. She didn't say anything at first. She simply walked in, sat on the edge of Adanna's bed, and took the letter from her hands, reading it in silence. Then, she handed it back and placed a bundle of cash on the mattress. Adanna's breath caught. Her fingers twitched. That should help, Amira said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Adanna didn't touch the money. Yet. Amira stood up and walked toward the door. When you're ready, she said over her shoulder, you know where to find me. The door shut behind her. Adanna stared at the cash, heart pounding. She knew what it meant. She knew what taking it would turn her into. But she also knew what it felt like to be hungry, to be desperate, to be powerless. And for the first time, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Amira had been right all along. A dangerous temptation. The money sat untouched on Adanna's mattress, staring at her like a silent accusation. She hadn't moved it, hadn't even dared to touch it. But she hadn't thrown it away either. It was a test. She knew it. Amira was waiting to see what she would do. And deep down, Adanna knew that no matter what choice she made, there would be consequences. The weight of a choice. For the next few days, Adanna tried to ignore the money. She buried herself in schoolwork, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had. The moment Amira had placed that cash on her bed, the world had shifted. Girls who had never paid her any attention before now greeted her with knowing smiles. Some whispered as she passed, casting glances at her that were half admiration, half suspicion. And Zara barely spoke to her. She had seen the money. She had heard the whispers. And when Adanna tried to explain, Zara just shook her head. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, "and you know it." Adanna wanted to argue. Wanted to tell Zara that she hadn't taken the money, that she hadn't done anything wrong. But then, why did she feel so guilty? The offer that changed everything. It happened 2 nights later. Adanna had just returned from evening prep, her mind still tangled in thoughts, when she found Amira waiting for her outside the dormitory. She was leaning casually against the wall, her arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Taking your time, aren't you?" she said. Adanna tensed. "I never said I wanted the money." Amira shrugged. "But you haven't given it back either." Silence. Adanna shifted uncomfortably. "What do you want from me?" Amira pushed off the wall and stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You need money," she said. "I can give it to you. But not for free." Adanna's heart pounded. "I don't." "I'm not asking you to do what the others do," Amira interrupted smoothly. "Not yet. But there are other ways to make money, you know." Adanna swallowed. "Like what?" Amira's smile widened. "Come with me tonight. Just watch. That's all. No pressure." Adanna hesitated. She wanted to say no. She should have said no. But the letter from home burned in her mind. The image of her mother's worried face. The fear of being sent back home as a failure. She took a breath. And nodded a world without rules. Sneaking out was easier than Adanna had expected. The school had weak spots, places where the walls were low, where the night guards rarely checked. Amira led her and 2 other girls, Simi and Yemi, through the shadows, their movements swift and silent. At the back of the school, a black car waited. The driver barely acknowledged them as they climbed in, the doors shutting with a quiet finality. As the car pulled away, Adanna felt something inside her shift. She was crossing a line. And there would be no going back. The party that wasn't just a party. The house was massive. A mansion, glittering with chandeliers and music so loud it vibrated through the ground. Inside, everything was different. No uniforms. No rules. No teachers watching their every move. Adanna watched as the other girls transformed, laughter, drinks, slipping into the arms of older men who were waiting for them like predators. She felt sick. Amira handed her a glass. "Relax," she said. "Just watch." Adanna clutched the glass but didn't drink. Her heart pounded as she realized what this really was. This wasn't just a party. It was a transaction. And the girls weren't guests. They were merchandise. A dangerous game. As the night went on, Adanna tried to disappear into the background. But then, a man approached her. He was older. Well-dressed. Eyes sharp and calculating. "You're new," he said, smiling. "What's your name?" Adanna's mouth went dry. Before she could answer, Amira slid in between them, smiling sweetly. "She's just here to watch tonight." The man raised an eyebrow. "Shy." "She's smart," Amira corrected. "She knows her value." The man chuckled. "Good. I like girls who know their worth." He handed Amira a thick envelope of cash. "Call me when she changes her mind." Adanna couldn't breathe. She felt like she had just been sold. And the worst part, she hadn't even protested. The beginning of the end. They returned to the dormitory just before dawn. Adanna slipped into bed, her heart racing, her mind a mess. She had done nothing. She had agreed to nothing. But she had let it happen. And now, she belonged to Amira. There was no going back. There never had been. The fall from grace. Adanna wasn't the same girl who had walked through the iron gates of St. Mercy. She felt it in the way she moved, more careful, more aware of the eyes watching her. She felt it in the whispers that followed her through the hallways, in the way Zora's silence had turned from disappointment to something worse, pity. But most of all, she felt it in herself. She had seen too much. And she had crossed too many lines. Even though she had never taken the envelope of cash, never accepted the man's offer, never let herself become one of Amira's girls. She had never said no, either. And that was enough to change everything. The price of being noticed. The week after the party, Adanna started noticing small changes. Her school uniform, once the same as everyone else's, now looked neater, crisper. Her food portions in the cafeteria were slightly bigger. And one afternoon, when she opened her locker, a brand new phone sat on top of her books. She didn't have to ask who had left it. The moment she picked it up, a message flashed across the screen. Amira, welcome to the real St. Mercy. Adanna's stomach twisted. She had told herself she wasn't part of this. That she had just watched. But now, it was clear. She had been recruited. The first real test. That night, as Adanna sat on her bed, staring at the untouched phone in her hands, Zora spoke for the first time in days. You're going back, aren't you? Adanna tensed. No. Zora snorted. Then why haven't you thrown that away? Adanna had no answer. Zora shook her head. I hope you know what you're doing. Adanna wasn't sure she did. The trap closes in. The next night, Amira found her. She didn't ask. She didn't give Adanna a choice. She simply handed her a dress, silky, expensive, far too revealing, and said, get dressed. Tonight is different. Adanna hesitated. Don't be stupid, Amira said smoothly. It's just a dinner. You won't have to do anything. Just smile, look pretty, and enjoy yourself. Adanna's fingers curled around the dress. She knew Amira was lying. But she also knew she had already stopped resisting long ago. And so, she put it on. A dangerous kind of power. The dinner was held in a private lounge, far from the noise of the usual clubs. Here, there was no music, no flashing lights. Just polished floors, golden chandeliers, and men who spoke in quiet voices that held too much power. Adanna sat beside Amira, her hands clasped in her lap, listening as the men spoke about business, politics, and money. And then, one of them turned to her. You're new, he said. Adanna met his eyes. He was older, but not ancient. Handsome, in a way that made her skin crawl. His suit probably cost more than her father's entire life savings. She's special, Amira said before Adanna could answer. She's still deciding if she's ready. The man smiled, slow and knowing. Take your time, then. But the way he looked at her said something else. I can wait. And for the first time, Adanna realized something terrifying. She wasn't a guest here. She was an investment. The breaking point. They left late that night. The man had barely spoken to Adanna again, but his gaze had followed her throughout dinner. As if he was memorizing her. As if he was already claiming her. And as they climbed back into the car, as the school's gates grew closer, Adanna felt something inside her snap. She turned to Amira. I want out. Amira didn't even blink. She just smiled. Out, she repeated, as if tasting the word. Adanna nodded. I don't belong here. I don't want this. Amira sighed. You really think it's that simple? Adanna clenched her fist. I never agreed to anything. But you never stopped it either, Amira murmured, leaning in. You took the money, Adanna. You came to the parties. You sat at their tables. Adanna's breath hitched. I didn't. You belong to this now, Amira said softly. And if you try to leave, the only thing waiting for you is regret. The car pulled up behind the dormitory. The moment it stopped, Adanna shoved the door open and ran. She ran past the empty corridors. Ran past the silent dormitories. Ran until she collapsed onto her bed, her chest heaving, her hands shaking. Zara sat up, eyes wide. What happened? Adanna looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the truth with painful clarity. She had walked into a trap. And now, she had no idea how to escape. The betrayal and the warning. Adanna spent the next few days pretending. Pretending that she hadn't been at that dinner. Pretending that she hadn't seen the way the man had looked at her. Pretending that she wasn't trapped. But Amira knew. And she was waiting. The silent war. The shift was subtle at first. The girls who used to whisper in admiration now whispered in warning. Simi and Yemi, once friendly, now watched her with cold eyes. Even the teachers, though oblivious to what was really happening, sensed something had changed. But the worst of it came one afternoon in the dining hall. Adanna had just sat down with her tray when Amira walked past her. She didn't stop. She didn't say anything. She just let a small, folded piece of paper drop onto Adanna's lap. Adanna's hands trembled as she unfolded it. One sentence. Meet me tonight, or you'll regret it. Adanna's stomach twisted. She was running out of time. The last meeting. That night, she found Amira waiting outside the dormitory. Unlike before, she was alone. No Simi. No Yemi. No laughter or teasing. Just Amira, standing under the moonlight, watching Adanna with quiet amusement. You've been avoiding me, Amira said. Adanna crossed her arms. I told you, I'm done. Amira chuckled. Done? With what, exactly? Adanna swallowed. With all of it. The parties. The men. The money. I never asked for any of this. Amira's expression remained unreadable. Then why did you come? Adanna froze. You had a choice, Amira continued, stepping closer. You could have walked away that first night. But you didn't. Adanna opened her mouth, but no words came. Because deep down, she knew Amira was right. She had chosen. She had let curiosity pull her in. And now she was paying the price. Amira sighed, almost tired. Listen, Adanna, she said softly. I like you. I really do. So let me give you some advice. Adanna waited, heart pounding. You can't just leave, Amira whispered. There are people who know your name now. People who don't like loose ends. Adanna felt a chill creep up her spine. What are you saying? I'm saying, Amira said, eyes darkening, that if you try to run, you won't just lose your scholarship. You'll lose everything. Silence. And then, a slow, knowing smile. Be smart, Adanna. Then she was gone. Leaving Adanna standing in the dark, cold with fear. The message from home. The next morning, Adanna's world shattered. A teacher called her to the principal's office. Her mother was on the phone. Adanna. Her mother's voice was shaky. Are you okay? Adanna frowned. Yes, why? Her mother hesitated. 2 men came to the house, she whispered. They said they knew you. Adanna's blood ran cold. They offered us money, Her mother continued. They said it was for you. Adanna's heart pounded in her chest. Did you take it? Of course not. Her mother's voice cracked. Adanna, what is happening? Are you in trouble? Tears burned in Adanna's eyes. No, Mama. I'm fine. A lie. A dangerous, necessary lie. She ended the call and sat there, shaking. Amira had made her point. There was no running. But there was one thing she could still do. The plan. That night, Adanna went to Zara. For the first time in weeks, she told her everything. Zara listened, her face unreadable. When Adanna finished, Zara took a deep breath. We have to end this. Adanna stared at her. How? Zara's eyes darkened. We exposed them. Adanna's breath hitched. That's suicide. Maybe, Zara admitted. But if we don't, you'll never be free. Adanna hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. She had been afraid. But now, she was angry. And she wasn't going down without a fight. The betrayal. The next day, Zara went to the principal. She handed over names, evidence, details. And for the first time, St. Mercy's secrets began to crack. The administration moved quickly. Too quickly. Within 24 hours, the police arrived. The school was thrown into chaos. Phones were confiscated. The abortion pills Amira's group had hidden in the dormitories were discovered. By evening, the chemists supplying them were arrested. And by nightfall, Amira was expelled. The final threat. The last time Adanna saw Amira was in the principal's office. She had no silk dress, no jewelry, no power. Just a girl in a wrinkled uniform, staring at Adanna with unreadable eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Amira smirked. You think this is over, she murmured. Adanna didn't answer. Amira leaned closer. You just made enemies you can't even see. She smiled. Then she was gone. And Adanna was left wondering. Had she really won? Or had she just made things worse? The truth comes out. The walls of St. Mercy Girls' Boarding School were cracking. For years, the school had been a fortress, hiding its secrets behind iron gates and polished floors. But now, those secrets were bleeding into the daylight. The police had arrived. The teachers were whispering. And the girls who once laughed were now afraid. But no one was more afraid than Adanna. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The interrogation. The school clinic had been turned into a makeshift investigation center. One by one, the girls who had been part of Amira's ward were called in. Some denied everything. Some begged for mercy. And some, like Simi and Yemi, simply refused to speak. But the real storm hit when Amira was questioned. She didn't plead or cry or deny. She just smiled. And when the principal demanded names, she leaned back and said, why should I be the only one to fall? The betrayal that no one expected. By the next morning, the list of expelled students had tripled. Girls who had been Amira's closest friends. Girls who had only attended one party. Girls who had never even left the dorms, but had known too much. All of them, gone. But Amira had saved her worst betrayal for last. Because when the final name was read aloud, Adanna felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Adanna Okafor. Silence. Then, the principal turned to her. You were seen sneaking out. You attended these gatherings. You took money. Adanna's heart pounded. I never. You stayed silent, the principal said. And silence is complicity. The decision came faster than Adanna had expected. By the end of the day, she was being escorted to the school gates. Expelled. Disgraced. A month ago, she had walked into St. Mercy with a scholarship and a dream. Now, she was walking out with nothing. Her belongings fit into a single bag. Her name was being whispered like a curse. And behind her, Zara watched in horrified silence. "I tried to save you," Zara whispered. "I didn't think they'd." Adanna forced a smile. "At least we stopped them." But as she turned away, she realized something. Had they really won? Or had Amira played them all? They returned to a broken home. Her mother cried when she saw her. Not the kind of loud wailing that shook the walls. The kind of crying that came without sound. The kind that meant something had broken. Her father didn't say a word. Just sat in his chair, staring at the floor, as if the weight of disappointment had finally crushed him. "We sacrificed everything," her mother whispered. "And for what?" Adanna had no answer. Because deep down, she was asking herself the same question. The unwanted gift. Days passed, the news spread. Neighbors whispered. Former classmates stopped answering her calls. The life she had once dreamed of was gone. But then, a letter arrived. No name. No return address. Inside, there was just a single slip of paper. And written on it, in elegant handwriting, was one sentence. "This doesn't end here." And beneath it, a bundle of crisp, fresh cash. Enough to start over. Enough to buy her silence. Adanna's fingers trembled as she held the money. And she knew. Somewhere, Amira was still watching. The price of choices. The money sat on the table. Neat. Clean. A silent promise. Adanna stared at it, her heart beat steady but her mind racing. It wasn't just cash. It was a message. A reminder that even though St. Mercy had expelled her, even though she had walked away, Amira's word hadn't let her go. She could take it. Start over. Erase everything. Or she could burn it. And start a war she wasn't ready to fight. The final choice. That night, Adanna sat in her mother's kitchen, watching the flickering light of the lantern. She held a bundle of cash between her fingers, turning it over and over. The weight of it felt too heavy. Too real. She thought of Amira. Of the nights she had spent balancing on the edge of temptation and destruction. She thought of Zora. Of the look on her face when she had watched Adanna leave St. Mercy for the last time. And she thought of the girl she used to be. The one who had walked into that school with dreams bigger than her fears. Adanna exhaled. And tossed the money into the fire. It called and blackened, the flames licking away the last traces of Amira's influence. Let them watch. Let them know. She wasn't for sale. The cost of survival. The days passed slowly. The world had moved on without her. Her name was no longer whispered in the streets. She was just another girl who had made a mistake. Another girl who had fallen. But Adanna refused to let this be the end of her story. She found work, small, tiring jobs that paid just enough. She saved every coin, slowly rebuilding what she had lost. And she learned. She learned that power wasn't about money. It was about control. And for the first time in a long time, Adanna had taken hers back. Amira's last move. Months later, she received one last letter. No money this time. Just words. You should have taken the offer. Adanna read it once. Then again. Then, slowly, she smiled. Amira had lost. Because Adanna wasn't afraid anymore. She had been pushed, tested, broken. And yet, here she stood. Not as a victim. Not as a girl who had fallen. But as a girl who had survived. A new beginning. Years later, when Adanna walked past St. Mercy, she barely recognized it. The iron gates were still there. The polished floors still gleamed. But the secrets were gone. The new principal had cleaned house. No more midnight escapes. No more girls forced into lives they never wanted. Amira's legacy had died the day she was expelled. And Adanna? She had built something new. She had clawed her way back to school, studied harder than ever, and earned her place again, on her own terms. As she walked past those gates, she didn't feel anger. She didn't feel fear. She only felt freedom. Because this time, she wasn't looking back. The lesson that remained. There would always be girls like Amira. Girls who played by different rules. Girls who thought power came from controlling others. But there would also be girls like Adanna. Girls who fell, learned, and rose again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real power.